Good evening, everyone. This is Hell's Unicorn once again, and I'm just going to do a quick stream of consciousness talk about John Maynard Keynes. Some call him Lord, I call him Lord of Crap, and the current economic situation that we find ourselves in. Other people have given their opinions on this subject, and many of them have been more articulate on the subject than I am, but I'm on a bit of a roll tonight, so I'm just going to say my piece on this and find out who agrees with me on this. The overall premise of statism is a very basic one. It stems from the opinion that mankind can aspire to higher things when they are led by a intellectual elite who know better for them what they should do with their lives and get out of their lives than they themselves do. This goes all the way back to ancient Greek philosophy, and it's been with us since the beginning. I mean, if you want to look at the Roman Republic collapsing into the Roman Empire, you want to look at the Roman Catholic Church, look into all things Roman, basically, or if you want to look into other societies where this mode of governance was tried, the results were essentially the same. There's a period of prosperity for a while, normally when controls on economic behavior are lightened, and gradually and incrementally the controls are increased, the economies stagnate. This tends to coincide with lower birth rates, because why the heck would you want to have children if you can't even provide for them? And then eventually the systems of government become so oppressive that the actual republics and or empires collapse. They get taken over by somebody else. This is basically the ebb and flow of history. And America is probably looking at this at some point down the road. Now, I would personally say that it's most likely going to be a collapse similar to the old Soviet Union, in which we basically see the old empire break up into several pieces and become much smaller republics. And in the case of the former Soviet Union, this breakup was mostly done along the borders of different cultural and tribal borders, so to speak. That's pretty much how the nationalities were established. And I think in this case, if and when a breakup occurs, the borders will be drawn more on ideological lines than they will be on cultural or racial lines, since we're, for the most part, culturally mongrels. We've been a melting pot for a long time, and we don't really have any distinct cultures anymore. We simply have different shades of ideology. Now, the thing that I really wanted to get at with regards to Lord Keynes is that he was a man who made frequent references and appeals to thinking about new ideas, about coming up with something new. But when you look at when you take what he did and what he suggested we do down to brass tacks, what you have is something that is really, I would call it Marxism light. It's basically caught somewhere between the transition from capitalism into socialism model that was present in the Communist Manifesto. It's the idea that increased government intervention will in turn yield better economic results, and that progressively these endeavors will lead to greater prosperity. This was precisely what Marx himself argued, that wage disparities would be eliminated over time through the transition into socialism. Everyone would get together and sing Kumbaya, and then miraculously the entire system would essentially secede out upon itself, fragment, and you would get small communal societies living in basically a utopian New World Order, as it were. And this, of course, was essentially a secularized version of the 1,000-year millennium of Judeo-Christian teaching. It was passed off as something that was secular and something that was progressive and intellectual, but really it was nothing more than plagiarized biblical prophecy meshed with really bad understandings of economics. And Keynes was distinct from Marx, although I would argue that he was probably influenced by Marx, in that he avoided the utopian outlook, but he basically pushed the same ideas. Now, the problem with these ideas are very simple. I'm going to display where the flaws are in Keynes's ideas by doing what he said we absolutely cannot do, and that is treat macroeconomics as if they are simply a greater expanded version of microeconomics. Let's deal with the most simplest of variables and then simply multiply them, and eventually we'll get to a macro form. He argues that macroeconomics is a completely distinct and different art unto itself. That's probably how he attempted to protect himself from criticism. I'll give you an example. Let's say I own a lemonade stand, and I'm charging $1 for a glass of lemonade, and I have a regular customer base of, let's say, 50 customers a day, so I'm pulling in $50 a day. And we'll assume that Keynesianism hasn't completely destroyed the value of the dollar, and $50 a day is enough to live on. Now, let's say the government comes in and decides we're going to tax you at a bracket of 22%. And then we, in turn, are going to redistribute that 22 cents out of each dollar the way that we see fit. Some of it will come back to you. Some of it will go to different people. But essentially, the theory goes is that this will yield greater economic activity because the government will have essentially assisted you in moving around your wealth and keeping money moving, as it were. This essentially plays upon the broken window fallacy that causing destruction and essentially taxing is destroying, in a sense. It is confiscating a certain amount of wealth and then taking it out of the system. Now, the broken window fallacy fails because the person who is originally in ownership of the wealth that is used to fix that broken window would have spent his wealth elsewhere and would have naturally influenced the economy in a less distorted way. There is a natural ebb and flow of economics. It's dictated by human actions. Ludwig von Mises gets into this in his various works, and he is very correct about this. But there is this pervasive idea that taking something and then simply moving it somewhere else will automatically yield increased economic activity. There's a couple of problems with this. Number one, how do we know that the current technology, if we want to use that as an example, that's being invested in by the government is actually going to be a viable technology? We have to rely on the researchers of whoever is in the employment of the government. And last time I checked, most of the best researchers were in the private sector because jobs tend to be more lucrative out there. You're not stuck on a fixed salary. You can basically bargain with employers for a better price. Now, Keynesianism, though many believed that it was a marginalized way of doing economics, was very prevalent throughout the 1930s. Keynes himself was very much a part of the Bretton Woods deal, which is the current source of our current problems when it comes to monetary policy. We attempted to fix the Bretton Woods deal by essentially taking it to its logical conclusion, which was divorcing any kind of physical standard from the paper currency. Having a paper currency in and of itself is problematic, but having one that isn't checked by any kind of limited durable standard is going to run into problems very quickly. This was understood by basically every reputable economist during the 18th and early 19th century, and even by politicians of the time, such as Thomas Jefferson, as shocking as that may be given how intellectually vapid most politicians are today. So, what do we owe to Mr. Keynes? Do we owe the admiration that certain people like Radio Hogan and certain modern-day charlatans like Paul Krugman pay him, or do we owe him something else entirely, which would be our complete and utter contempt? I would argue the latter. I think that the man has done absolutely nothing but destruction. His ideas are poison, and I think that any nation that abandons them completely will be the better for it. I think that Keynes's ideology is actually almost identical to that of fascism. Manipulation of corporations through government fiscal policy is pretty well on par with what Mussolini and other allegedly right-wing fascist governments did. And again, it's not a sustainable system. Look where Mussolini ended up. Look where Hitler ended up. Look where all of these people that tried this approach of government-managed economics ended up. Eventually, where you end up is you have to start a war with somebody else and steal the wealth of whoever you've conquered in order to maintain that. That's the reason why all of these countries ended up becoming expansionist and imperial, and eventually that's exactly what's going to happen to us. Eventually, this is going to get so bad, unemployment is going to get so intolerably high that we're going to need some sort of a distraction to keep people from mounting a revolution. And having an actual revolution is probably not a very good scenario to have either. I would much rather have a peaceful resolution to a situation like this. But, power tends to corrupt, and power tends to want to protect its own. So I don't really see an actual resolution to this problem within the standard working of politics. I think that if things are going to change, it's going to have to either be done through an immediate and sudden mass participation of the people, which may happen, or it would be accomplished by all of the people becoming so disenchanted with the system that they just stop participating in it completely, and then the government essentially dies a slow death, withering on the vine with nothing to support it. Government is by nature parasitic, especially when it involves itself in day-to-day economics on any level. Government is there for a specific purpose, and that purpose is the maintenance of security and securing the actual landscape by which free markets can occur. It's there to enforce laws against violations of the standards of a free market. It is not there to rule the market. Government is essentially, for lack of a better term, pure, unadulterated force. And what happens when force becomes the unquestioned master of a civilization? I'll let you answer that question for yourselves. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.